U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has accused China of destabilizing actions in the South China Sea and vowed to help Southeast Asian allies while speaking in Kuala Lumpur. Hegseth has further proposed a shared maritime domain awareness system with Australia, Japan, and the Philippines. Canada and Australia have signed a joint declaration to strengthen cooperation on critical minerals during the G7 Energy and Environmental Ministers meeting in Toronto. The newly elected Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi has stated that there are no plans to negotiate the $550 billion investment package that was agreed with U.S. President Donald Trump earlier under the former Prime Minister Ishiba's term in office. New Mexico State in U.S. has launched the very first free child care for all as part of a statewide program to improve education and child welfare rankings. Governor-led initiatives since 2019 have culminated to this landmark policy. France's National Assembly has rejected a left-wing proposal to impose a wealth tax on the ultra-rich, backing instead a government plan to tax holding company assets. Brazil is offering free cruise cabins to some nations after dozens of countries failed to secure lodging ahead of the UN COP30 climate summit, which expects 50,000 delegates but has only 18,000 hotel beds, leading to soaring room rates and logistical chaos. Meanwhile, Brazil has vowed that even the world's most climate-vulnerable nations will have a voice at the November 10 to 21st UN summit. Israeli media has reported that body parts handed over by the Red Cross do not belong to any of the missing hostages after forensic examinations were completed. The transfer had followed Israel's return of 30 Palestinian bodies to Gaza, a move seen as part of efforts to sustain the fragile ceasefire despite recent deadly strikes. China's military has monitored and tracked a Philippines joint patrol in the South China Sea on October 30th to 31st, warning it seriously undermined regional peace and stability. The statement comes as Washington and Manila announced a new joint task force to boost security cooperation. Now we start with U.S. In a briefing, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth spoke on the U.S. shutdown that continues as he was asked about a donation of $130 million that was made recently. He has highlighted how grateful he was towards Americans who would be willing to ensure that U.S. troops are paid. Let's in fact listen to what he has said.
On the government shutdown, the $130 million donation to pay troops, has that gone under an ethics review to determine whether there's a conflict of interest?
We are very grateful for generous Americans who would be willing to ensure that U.S. troops are paid, and we're thankful to President Trump and Vice President Vance and everyone, Russ Vought and others who made sure, and our department that made sure that no matter what's happening, the troops are getting paid. That's a priority of President Trump. It's happening. Democrats are not contributing to that. President Trump's making that happen, and that's an important outcome because the work we're talking about right here across our countries, certainly the Department of War front and center on that. So.
The $130 million donation has been drawing controversy. The money, which President Donald Trump says was sent by a friend, is being used to help pay U.S. troops during the ongoing government shutdown. Experts say it's likely the first time in history that a private citizen's funds have been used for military pay and warned it could violate federal law. Under the Constitution, only Congress can authorize federal spending, meaning the Pentagon may not legally use the money without an appropriation. Critics call it a dangerous precedent, while the Trump administration calls it a patriotic gesture to support the troops. Now for this discussion, we welcome Raymond Vickery. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Raymond, for joining us again. Now, is it true that this is a first time in history that something like this is happening? And what are the potential as well as legal constitutional implications of using such private, huge donations to fund U.S. military pay?
Well, thanks very much for having me. It raises very troubling issues across the board. There is a constitutional question. The monies which are to be spent by the U.S. government have to be appropriated by the Congress. There is no provision for private funding of armies. It raises ethical questions in terms of who is it that's doing this? What interest do they have? Or is it a defense company or individual that has such an interest? It's very, very troubling, but it is a part of the President Trump attempt to control the military. He has long railed against the deep state, including in the Defense Department. He's tried to get rid of generals and admirals that will not do his bidding. And so this is just one step further to take out of the equation Congress and to have private monies used in terms of defense. It's a very, very troubling development.
And do you think this could be precedent? How could this precedent affect future U.S. government funding practices and the relationship between private donors and federal spending?
Well, it has enormous implications if it becomes a precedent. I think, as you've pointed out, this is unprecedented now. This has never happened before. If it's allowed to go forward and to be expanded, what's to stop a group of billionaires who have a particular interest in terms of defense or foreign policy from making a contribution? And of course, there will be influence then put on how we conduct our defense establishment. President Trump has already designated it not for defense, but for war. That is not in the way in which a democracy should run. Civilian control of the military means not just people who are not military, but it means that it goes through a constitutional and legal process. So if this becomes a precedent, it can be expanded from 130 million to 130 billion. And then what do you have left of democracy in terms of checks and balances, of the passage of laws, all those things which are put forward in our Constitution and Code of Laws?
Yes, indeed. We will be eyeing that. Thank you very much, Raymond Vickery, for joining us and sharing that insight from Washington, D.C. Now we move on to our next news. The United States and the Philippines have agreed to form a new joint military task force that will cover strategic areas, including the South China Sea. The announcement was made by the Pentagon following a meeting between U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and his Philippines counterpart Gilberto Teodoro on the sidelines of the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting in Kuala Lumpur. The new task force, which is named as Task Force Philippines, is designed to increase military coordination in key maritime areas, particularly in the disputed South China Sea, which is a crucial trade route for global shipping. Speaking at a recent news briefing in Kuala Lumpur, the U.S. Defense Secretary has stressed the completion of a new plan which will help modernize the defense partnership between the U.S. and the Philippines, and also expedite their key projects over the next 2 years. Let's listen in.
Paro and I are in close coordination at all times, ensuring we've got capabilities where we need them, when we need them, but those specific reports are not in keeping with what's happening right now. We're always prepared for eventualities and what may or may not happen to ensure we're strongly postured. And working with our partners in the Philippines, I think that's what you're referring to mostly. We've got lots of options and lots of capabilities in the region, but ultimately we're not going to reveal precisely what we may or may not do. So, thank you.
The United Earlier yesterday, Pete Hegseth also met with his Chinese counterpart, where he has raised concerns about Beijing's activities in the South China Sea and around Taiwan, as well as its recent action towards U.S. allies and partners in the region. The United States and the Philippines have agreed to form a new joint military task force that will cover strategic areas, including the South China Sea. The announcement was made by the Pentagon following a meeting between U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and his Philippines counterpart, Gilberto Teodoro, on the sidelines of the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting in Kuala Lumpur. The new task force, which is named as a Task Force Philippines, is designed to increase military coordination in key maritime areas, particularly in the South China Sea, which is a disputed sea area. Now, for this discussion, we welcome Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you very much, Ross, for joining us again. Good to see you. Ross, what more can you tell us about the motives behind Task Force Philippines that is designed to increase military coordination between U.S. and Philippines?
The reality is that the Philippines and the United States are treaty allies. The United States has repeatedly publicly said that it will uphold its treaty obligations. It doesn't matter who the president is, whether that's Trump in his first term, Biden, or Trump now in his second term. So there's been a lot of speculation about President Trump's commitment to treaty allies, whether that's NATO, Japan, South Korea, or the Philippines. But we see by its actions that the Trump administration is willing to actually do substantive things to show that it is committed to this treaty ally. And obviously they're doing this because of concerns about China's actions in the South China Sea. That's just very obvious as well. And also I think there's an element here similar to how the Trump administration approaches other treaty allies, is that the United States, and I think fairly, expects the Philippines to commit more to its own defense, to spend more money on its defense, which the Philippines has been doing under President Marcos, but there's still much room for improvement. And I think the United States is willing to say, we're willing to uphold our commitment, but you guys have to do something on your side as well.
And what political and diplomatic challenges could arise for U.S. in balancing its defense commitments with the Philippines while managing relationship with China?
Certainly China is going to complain about this. So the likelihood is that spokespeople for the Chinese government, whether it's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or their military spokespersons, are going to have something to say about this. But we're used to that. If the United States engages in military exercises in the region with any of its treaty allies, or if the United States unilaterally sails through the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait, China criticizes that. So we've seen all of this before. But again, I think the key thing here is a demonstration by the Trump administration that it is willing to stand by a treaty ally.
With that, I would like to thank Ross Feingold for always joining us and sharing that insight as a political analyst. Now we move on to America. The Trump administration has imposed new restrictions on media access inside the West Wing, limiting journalists' ability to freely enter Room 140, known as Upper Press, where senior communications officials work in Pentagon. Under the new rule, reporters must now book appointments to meet White House staff, a move the administration says is needed to protect sensitive materials linked to the National Security Council. Critics, including the White House Correspondents Association, has denounced the decision as a blow to press freedom and government transparency. President Wei Jiang has warned the limits hinder journalists' ability to question officials and hold the administration accountable. White House Communications Director Stephen Chung has defended the restrictions, citing incidents of reporters secretly recording and entering restricted areas. The move follows recent Pentagon press curbs and past efforts by the Trump administration to limit access for outlets seen as critical. This step echoes a short-lived policy from Bill Clinton's presidency back in 1993. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Raymond Vickery. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Raymond, for joining us again and staying with us. Now, how could these new White House media restrictions impact transparency, accountability, and could limiting press access affect investor confidence or market perceptions of U.S. economic policy, and how?
Well, thanks very much for letting me comment on this. You know, President Trump has in the past said that the press is the enemy of the people. This latest development in restricting access to upper press, the place where you can talk freely to the press secretary and other high press officials in the White House, unfortunately is of a piece of attack on the basic First Amendment right of freedom of the press. You have said what has happened at the Pentagon. There's been a similar restriction on access, but it doesn't stop there. The Associated Press has been downgraded and denied a slot which it had for a long time. There has been control over who gets to be in press pools. There has been an upgrading of those outlets, podcast, media outlets, which are friendly to the president. Democracy is more than just an election. It is not only the rule of law, but freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of thought. And unfortunately, this is very much of a piece of the president's attempt really to change the parameters and the customs which underlie a free democracy. And it will not stop there because the intent is to be able to have control rather than just a freedom of the press, which has been the tradition of the United States over the 250 years since our founding in 1776.
And what do you think are the potential long-term implications for government communication strategies with domestic and international business communities?
Well, the long-term implications are extremely frightening and extremely upsetting because if you do not have a free press, if there is a control of the messaging which gets out, then you're into a George Orwell 1984 kind of situation in which you can put out anything you want and say that is the truth, that's the way in which this is working. The democracy only works when you have an inquiring press, when you have freedom of discussion based upon that information. If you cut off information and only have the line put out that you want, then you are thrown into authoritarianism and what we have seen in authoritarian countries. This is not the tradition of the United States. It's not the tradition of other great democracies like India and Western Europe and Japan. And it has to be taken very seriously. And this is unfortunately a tactic which seems to be working in the United States, and that is not to do it in fell swoop, but just gradually, restricting at the White House, restricting at the Pentagon, restricting the access in terms of the press pool. So we need help in the United States. All democracies need help from others who love freedom of the press and freedom of expression.
Thank you very much, Raymond Vickery, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on, U.S. Vice President JD Vance has issued clarification after his comments about his wife's faith sparked controversy. The controversy began when Vance, while speaking at a Turning Point USA event in Mississippi, was asked if he wished his wife would come to Christ. Responding to it, Vance candidly said that he does hope eventually that his wife Usha somehow believes in his belief. Here's in fact a portion of their interaction. Let's listen in.
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to talk here today. I did not agree with many of the things that you said right ahead of this.
Now, most Sundays, Usha will come with me to church. As I've told her and I've said publicly, and I'll say now in front of 10,000 of my closest friends, do I hope eventually that she is somehow moved by the same thing that I was moved in by church? Yeah, I honestly do wish that, because I believe in the Christian gospel, and I hope eventually my wife comes to see it the same way. But if she doesn't, then God says everybody has free will, and so that doesn't cause a problem for me. That's something you work out with your friends, with your family, with the person that you love. Again, one of the most important Christian principles is that you respect free will. Usha's closer to the priest who baptized me than maybe I am. They talk about this stuff. My attitude is you figure this stuff out as a family, and you trust in God to have a plan, and you try to follow it as best as you can, and that's what I try to do.
As you've seen, the question was posed to him by a lady believed to be of Indian origin, who also pointedly criticized Vance's call to reduce legal immigration into the United States. JD Vance's remarks on hoping his wife turns Christian quickly went viral, with many accusing Vance of insensitivity towards his wife's Hindu identity and calling his words an example of religious entitlement, while many others defended Vance, saying he was merely expressing a personal wish rooted in his own faith, not demanding conversation. Vance, in a post on X, has broken his silence on this matter. He has denounced the criticism online and has said that his wife has no plans to convert, while reiterating that he hopes that wife Usha sees the things as he does. He further stated that he will continue to support and love her and talk to her about faith and life. Further defending his comments, he has also stated that as Christians, it's normal to share their belief with people, and that if anyone is saying otherwise, they're propaganding an agenda. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Raymond Vickery. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C., and another guest, former Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. He's a former ambassador, joins us live from New Delhi. Now first, I would like to go to Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev for my first question. What do you think was the motive behind JD Vance's answering on this particular issue? Do you think it was to cater to his mostly Christian audience or MAGA audience?
Partly there, but there were other perhaps motives. Mississippi down south tends to be a more Christian traditional society in the United States, and he would have figured that making such strong assertions towards Christianity would stand him in good stead. I would also like to state here that he is vice president to someone who's nearly twice as old as he is, Mr. Donald Trump, and Mr. Trump, being on his second term, does not stand for re-election next time. So it would be natural for Mr. Vance to project himself as a likely candidate for the next election as a Republican presidential nominee. And this kind of strong, personalized statements do not do him any harm with regard to the Christian belt, with regard to MAGA, and with regard to majoritarianism that is sweeping the United States at the moment. You would recall that DEI and other anti-discriminatory provisions of the U.S. government have been given a bye, and immigration is being seen as the evil that holds America back. We would also, I think, mention here that, objectively speaking, perhaps as an outsider, there was no need for Vice President to talk about his family life.
Yes.
He would have, as a more cultivated and sophisticated politician, he would have perhaps avoided it.
Yes,
But he
indeed.
waded into it, and he gave himself the right to speak on behalf of his wife, who, like him, has a law degree from Yale. They were classmates, and she has a roaring professional practice. Now, with all that, Mr. Vance is has given himself full authority to talk about his wife's religion, whether she wants to convert or not convert. Doesn't it speak of the
Yes.
same kind of patriarchy that very often Indians are, or Indians or third world countries are often accused of?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev. Now I'd like to take our other guest, respectable Raymond Vickery's stance on this. What do you think about this? And also critics have rolled and grilled JD Vance online, and they have been they have said that he has indeed thrown her and her religion under the bus. What do you think of the rhetoric and criticism about this as well?
Well, thanks very much for letting me comment on this. As I have said, it seems to me that fundamental to democracy is not just election. It's rule of law, it's freedom of the press, and it's freedom of the religion. Unfortunately, there are strong elements, particularly in the MAGA movement, the Make America Great Again movement, for Christian nationalism. And that is that you're not fully American unless you are a Christian. That a Christian nation has to be in the forefront according to Christian principles. And so it is troubling that the Vice President of the United States plays into this by really talking about his wife's religion and saying that really, in essence, that he hopes that she will convert. She can speak for herself. She is a practicer of a great religion. And we must be able to protect this freedom to choose in the United States. One of the founding principles of America was freedom of religion, because people didn't want to have a state religion as they had in England. And so people who were dissenters, whether they be Puritan, whether they be Baptist, whether they be Quakers, whether they be Jews, came to the United States in order to be able to have this freedom of religion. Vance, Vice President Vance says, well, it'll all be worked out in the family and individually. Well, that's not the approach he's taken. And he ought to take note that there are many in the Christian nationalist movement who believe that you're going straight to hell if you do not subscribe as a Christian. So it is not a refuge in terms of his approach just to say, well, this is a family matter, when he is putting it in the public forum and playing directly into the thought process of Christian nationalists in the United States.
Yes, indeed, very insightful. Thank you very much for always joining us. To both our guests, Raymond Vickery and Ambassador Mahich Sachdev, for joining us and sharing that insight from Washington, D.C. and New Delhi. Now we move on to our next news. The New York mayoral elections have gained momentum as former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is inching closer to Zohran Mamdani, who has been leading the popularity polls, while Republican Curtis Sliwa is also not far behind his opponents. The trilateral competition for the New York mayoral position is getting interesting, as a recent poll found Andrew Cuomo's popularity up by 7 percentage points. A new Atlas poll stated that Mamdani is leading with 41%, followed by Cuomo, who is running as an independent, trailing at 34%. Mamdani's policies and campaign have garnered attention across the political domain. He's leading in almost all poll predictions. In polls conducted by Real Clear Politics, Mamdani leads with an average of 14.5 percentage points. Mamdani is betting heavily on socialist policies, calling for higher taxes on billionaires while pushing for a policy framework opposite to the Republican bid. Mamdani is betting heavily on the socialist policies, calling for more taxations on billionaires while pushing for a policy framework that is opposite of the Republican bid.